Hello, everyone. Welcome to Practical Advice about Evaluations for Program Managers. I'm Derek Armstrong, an Executive Director here at the Canada School of Public Service, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Je tiens à mentionner que nous sommes avec vous aujourd'hui depuis Ottawa, en Ontario, qui est le territoire traditionnel du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe. Certains d'entre vous nous rejoignent aujourd'hui depuis différentes régions du Canada, travaillant sur différents territoires traditionnels autochtones. Et je vous encourage à prendre un moment pour le reconnaître et à y réfléchir et à chercher à comprendre la longue histoire de ce territoire. Avant de commencer, voyons qui est présent dans l'auditoire aujourd'hui. Nous vous invitons à interagir avec nous en utilisant la plateforme WooClap. Vous pouvez rejoindre la séance d'aujourd'hui dès maintenant à l'adresse www.wooclap.com. Entrez le code A30 pour participer ou utilisez le code QR à l'écran pour répondre à la première question. Prenez un instant pour répondre à la question sur le lien entre votre travail et l'évaluation. At the end of the session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. To send in a question, again, go to WooClap, enter code A30, and find the bubble chat icon at the bottom right of your screen. Please do ask questions in the language of your choice. L'évaluation des programmes est une fonction importante qui touche la plupart des aspects des opérations gouvernementales. De la mise en œuvre des politiques à la prestation des services. Beaucoup d'entre vous ont été directement ou indirectement impliqués dans le fonctionnement d'un programme et peuvent comprendre l'ampleur des questions qui peuvent être soulevées lorsqu'il s'agit de savoir si le programme a fonctionné comme prévu. La discussion d'aujourd'hui porte sur les approches qui vous aideront à vous préparer à l'évaluation d'un programme et à tirer profit des conclusions qui en découlent. Joining us today are voices of experience from both the program and the evaluation communities. Our speakers bring several important perspectives and leadership lessons from the program manager and evaluator points of view. Tout d'abord, du secteur des programmes sociaux et culturels au secrétariat du Conseil du Trésor et ancien dirigeant principal de la vérification et d'évaluation dans un certain nombre de ministères, le secrétaire adjoint David Peckham. David joins Danielle White, Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic Policy from Indigenous Services Canada. Danielle also leads the evaluation function for her department and brings a wealth of experience in policy co-development. Ensuite, nous accueillerons deux conférenciers qui dirigent les équipes d'évaluation de leur ministère. Kimberly Accardi, directrice générale de l'audit et de l'évaluation de ISDE, et Jérôme Mercier, chef de l'évaluation de EDSC. To round out the discussion and share their wisdom from the program perspective, we're joined by two speakers who led their program teams through different types of evaluation. First, we have Gemma Irwin, Director of the Global Innovation Clusters Program from ISED, and Benoit Cadieux, Director of Employment Insurance, Regular and Fishing Benefits Policy from ESDC. Thank you all for joining us today. Danielle and David, welcome. Let's start with evaluation from a Government of Canada perspective today. David, you've had a long relationship with audit and evaluation function from a departmental perspective, especially at Indigenous Service Canada. As a leader now in a central agency, how would you characterize the value that evaluations bring government programs?
Well, thank you for the warm welcome and for the invitation to participate in this learning event along my esteemed panelists here. I mean, I would say I've had the privilege of seeing evaluation from a lot of different perspectives. I've been a student of evaluation at University of Ottawa. I've led programs that have used evaluations. I've led evaluation functions, and now I take Treasury Board submissions to the board and present them to ministers, which has a flavor there. Donc, c'est vraiment un plaisir de participer à une activité dont l'objectif est d'aider les gestionnaires de programmes à tirer le meilleur parti des évaluations, ainsi qu'à devenir des leaders en matière de culture de résultats dans leur organisation. I think the first point I'll make is, sometimes evaluations are seen as just an accountability or a reporting tool or a necessary thing to do that are not really related to day-to-day program operations, seen as a burden almost. It's my really firm belief that a strong evaluation function is about learning. It can promote accountability, but it's also about improving the programs that we have that serve Canadians so that your clients will feel and see the difference in those programs. So I'm a big believer in evaluation, even though I no longer work in it, and I'm a big believer in its usage. But maybe I'll turn to my good friend and colleague here, Danielle. What do you see as the value of evaluation?
So I think I come at that question from a couple of different perspectives. One is the head of evaluation for ISC, also as the ADM of strategic policy. So I see the value in terms of the longer term vision and policy planning for the department, but I also have a couple of programs under my remit, both of which are going into an evaluation in the coming year. So I think in terms of the program piece, both of the initiatives that we're evaluating that fall under my responsibility are fairly new. If they're sitting in strategic policy, chances are they're innovation type initiatives where it was a huge heavy lift to get them up and running and implemented. But inevitably, some things are going to go well and others are going to go less well. And it's possible that some of our initial assumptions on how change is going to occur were off. So really, I see the value of, from a program manager's perspective, of really being able to step back and ask some fundamental questions and get some objective advice so that we can continue to improve, what it is that we're trying to accomplish and how we serve our partners. It's that learning opportunity and that continual improvement opportunity. But I also see from a strategic perspective the value of our evaluation work. We just completed a synthesis where we looked at all of our evaluations going back over a period of the last 7-8 years, thousands of key informant interviews, and we were able to pull out some very common trends that will factor into our medium-term planning, into our human resources planning. One of the things we found is a real challenge when it comes to delivering services in community is the high turnover of our staff. And we started to see it not just in a particular program or a particular sector, but program after program after program. Challenges in terms of the lack of flexibility of our terms and conditions. So we're starting to identify some really systemic issues that we can, work into our future planning.
Great.
Thanks, Danielle. Good to hear what you're up to at ISC. And I think, building on your points, the value of evaluation is really around the use. It's the findings and the recommendations, and making those, I would say, as actionable as they can be is really helpful for the program. And I think also helping you figure out things like how do you reach program clients, how do you run the program in a more efficient way, how do you provide evidence to support requests for additional resources. These are all kind of things that program managers can get out of evaluations. But to do that, it's really important that program managers explain to evaluators what they want to use the findings for. So if you imagine the world of an evaluator, you're going into something, you may have no experience in it, you may not have delved into that program. You're as good as the information you get from your colleagues working in that program. And that, for me, in my experience on both sides, makes or breaks an evaluation, really, in terms of its usefulness. Et aussi, lorsque les évaluateurs comprennent vos besoins, vos échéances, vos objectifs, ils peuvent essayer d'adapter la méthodologie d'évaluation en fonction de la situation. Donc, le secrétariat du Conseil du Trésor encourage vivement les évaluateurs à envisager un large éventail d'approches et de méthodes lorsqu'ils travaillent avec vous. And I think also it's opening the eyes of program managers as to what evaluation can be. There's a bit of a perception still it's very quantitative, or you're not going to get those stories and those kind of qualitative pieces that you might want to think present to us, Danielle. But I think being aware of all of the methodologies and the tools in the toolbox is really important.
Absolutely. Vous avez raison, David, c'est vraiment une question de collaboration entre les évaluateurs des programmes ainsi que des clients ou des partenaires qui dans certains cas, livrent les programmes et des services. Et c'est une opportunité, je le vois comme vraiment un partenariat dans le sens sans perdre notre objectivité, notre neutralité comme évaluateur, mais de mettre l'accent sur notre objectif commun, c'est vraiment d'améliorer des services aux Canadiens et d'assurer l'optimisation des ressources financières. Donc, dans ce contexte-là, c'est la mobilisation, la collaboration avec partenaires sont des principes centraux pour notre pratique d'évaluation au Service autochtone du Canada. Dans nos évaluations, nous cherchons toujours à solliciter la participation des communautés, dans certains cas de co-développer les termes de référence pour des projets d'évaluation pour assurer qu'on pose des bonnes questions et qu'on respecte des expériences vécues de nos clients. J'aime pas le mot client, mais nos partenaires. C'est plus ce qu'on dit. Et en fait, c'est les programmes, les gestionnaires de programmes qui ont ces relations avec des partenaires, avec des intervenants clés. Donc, il faut vraiment travailler en étroite collaboration avec eux. Et je pense que l'approche de mobiliser les groupes ciblés par nos programmes, oui, ça a une importance en particulier dans le contexte des services autochtones, mais je pense que c'est aussi pertinent pour n'importe quel programme au sein du gouvernement du Canada, quoi que ce soit des services pour des nouveaux immigrants, des Canadiens qui bénéficient des programmes d'assurance-emploi ou d'autres bénéfices sociaux, des personnes âgées qui bénéficient de certaines initiatives dans le domaine de la santé publique, etc. C'est eux qui sont les experts qui ont des voix le plus importantes dans le contexte de notre travail.
Thanks, Danielle. That's a great point. A couple of things I wanted to raise. I think the first is around data. And, you know, the struggle of getting good data has been a struggle since I was in evaluation in 2009, and what are we now, 2024? So I don't think that's changed. But I think the need for good data also hasn't changed. And when I think about when I present to ministers at the board, for example, to have those kind of killer stats at my fingertips as to how many clients have been served, what difference did this make, you know, was this the best way of doing this particular program when you come back for a renewal? Those are really the things that decision makers want to hear. But I think, you know, data's not easy. It's not easy to collect. It's not easy for program managers. But considering that very early on, designing your data requirements early on, integrating those into your program, and working to make sure your performance information profiles, et cetera, are updated is really important. And that's a tough task. I've been there. But, you know, when it comes to evaluation time, it really makes an absolutely huge difference in terms of the effectiveness of your evaluation. And I think that goes for all sorts of data, performance measurement data, and the data that you collect on the front line. The other point I just want to note is something that's not usually realized, but I've come to value, is the value of documenting a program. If you look at the suite of programs across the Government of Canada, I often find an evaluation is where it's all written down. The history of it, what it's supposed to do, and even that background documentation is actually extremely useful and not often recognized as such. So I just wanted to put that on the table too. But Danielle, how do you feel about evidence and evaluations and what we have?
Yeah, so I don't disagree. I think quantitative data, you know, is an absolutely critical element in telling a program's performance story. You know, and we work very closely. The Chief Data Officer for the department is also part of my sector. We work very closely with our results and delivery team, you know, at the front end to make sure that the performance indicators are right. We provide that input at the front end in Treasury Board submissions so that, you know, we have a hope of 5 years down the road when we're evaluating a program. We have good solid data, and I think there's, you know, huge potential in terms of some of the new technologies to improve our ability to link to data sources and mine more unstructured data. And, you know, we have those foundational pieces like the census of population. We have the surveys of Indigenous peoples in our context. And so you can really do that longitudinal study over time. But I also want to really highlight the importance of qualitative data, and how that's used in our evaluation work. We hold a lot of individual and small group conversations with partners, with key informants, and those really also can generate very rich sets of qualitative data. In our work, we seek to apply evaluation methods that are more centered in Indigenous worldviews, and recognize and appreciate the cultural significance of some of our programs, including water, clean water, and making sure that we take that into account in our work. And with that comes different ways of gathering data and different forms of data. And I'll just give you an example. We had a team that went out into the field recently, working with a group of program clients, and they had prepared as part of the work sort of an artistic expression of what the program meant to them. So there are lots of different ways of gathering data, and it is a valuable and meaningful source of evidence. And I think we have to be mindful, that of our own biases when it comes to what constitutes good data. And that's really something we've learned from our work with Indigenous partners on how do we tell the story, and recognizing, what is credible evidence, and that it comes in many forms. And I think part of what's driven some of our work in this area in the context of ISK is this idea, and I'm of mixed Mi'kmaq and settler ancestry, and there's a Mi'kmaq elder who's developed this concept people may have heard of in Mi'kmaq. It's called Edawaptamuk, or two-eyed seeing. And the idea is you see with one eye the best of Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, and you see with the other eye the best of Western thinking and Western practices, and you bring them both together for the benefit of all. And that's really something we try to apply in our evaluation practice.
Thanks, Danielle, for those insightful points. There's a couple of final things I'll mention in my remarks. If I look back, I think one of the most exciting things that's happened is the Gender-Based Analysis Plus, and I've seen its evolution over several years as an analytical tool to support the development of inclusive government initiatives, which are not just about does it work, but also who does it work for and how much does it work for various groups of people. And I feel like building that in has made a real difference in what I see coming through now, for example, in Treasury Board submissions, in people considering aspects of programming that they wouldn't have thought about before. So I just want to kind of underline, I see that as a really critical and very positive development that's taken place to dealing with any inequalities and serving diverse needs. The second piece is around the quality of life framework, which is a set of national interconnected economic, social, and environmental data, and helps departments reflect on how their programs impact people and their well-being. And I think for me, it's about what is success? What does people's well-being look like? How does that vary in different contexts? How can we measure that? And sometimes asking yourself those questions is really important as both an evaluator and a program manager.
Tout à fait d'accord, surtout dans le contexte de l'ACS+, comme un outil dans la pratique d'évaluation. C'est une lentille, même dans le programme, c'est une lentille que les évaluateurs peuvent s'appliquer pour mieux comprendre comment des groupes de clients divers peuvent avoir l'expérience de notre programme et de voir la variabilité en termes des questions d'accès, de la participation et les impacts. C'est toujours important de considérer ces facteurs aussi pour mieux servir des Canadiens et Canadiennes.
Merci, Danielle.
Well, thank you. I mean, there are some really important and striking points here, and I think one that I'd like to reflect on is this idea that both quantitative and qualitative data can be very important in informing evaluations, not just in terms of the evaluation itself per se, but also for understanding programs down the road. So I just want to thank you both for those great reflections. Il s'agit vraiment d'un point de vue convaincant sur le rôle que joue l'évaluation dans la responsabilisation, mais aussi dans l'introspection. D'autant plus que la situation budgétaire s'est resserrée Les leçons tirées de l'évaluation pourraient jouer un rôle important dans la restructuration du paysage du programme du Canada au nom de serment d'Hippocrate, à savoir s'abstenir de faire du mal. Et aussi en examinant les implications de nos décisions pour le système dans son ensemble. Alors, putting this all into practice could be a tremendous challenge or an equally attractive opportunity. And I'm delighted that we have a keen panel with us today of program leaders and their evaluation counterparts to dive into the ways that they've carved out success. I had the pleasure of interviewing our panelists prior to the event, and they shared many practical insights into their evaluation experiences. Several common themes emerged, and we'd like to share them with you today. Let's turn to Gemma Irwin of ISED first. And Gemma, tell us about the program that you operate and what tops your good strategy list for a successful evaluation.
Merci, Derek. Thanks. It was really great listening to you at the beginning because I think everything that you've said really captures what we do in our program. So I'm with the Global Innovation Clusters program. And we recently underwent an evaluation and actually just found out today that we've closed. We've completed progress on all of our recommendations, so it's always nice and fulfilling to have that done. But the clusters were created back in 2017 really as a 10-year play to develop world-leading ecosystems in Canada. And there's 5 independent industry-led clusters. And so this posed, a lot of challenges when we were trying to, set our program up for success at the beginning. You had, 5 new bodies that had to be organized, and then you had to get the right data, the right metrics. And then you had this added layer where I work where, at ISED we manage the program, and then we have these recipients, but these recipients at the end of the day were also, the point of the program was really to get collaboration projects off the ground and spur that innovation. So I think the biggest theme that I want to share with everyone today is around communication, because what we realized early on in the program is we thought we had things right, and then when we went to start working with our evaluation colleagues, we started to think through, it's right, on the right track, but this is a 10-year play, and we needed to get ready for renewal. And the timing was really great with our evaluation colleagues because we worked together early on, engaged each other, and I think what I found super useful was being able to ask questions on both sides and meet and discuss and actually dig into some of the issues and how we were going to unpack the data we were seeing. And to be quite frank, I don't think the data we had envisioned at the beginning of the program is now what we're using going forward. So we were renewed in budget 2022, and the evaluation played a key role as one of multiple lines of evidence we used when we developed our Treasury Board submission. It helped, bolster, the case for renewal. But to be, it did actually take several years to develop that case. It took several years for the clusters to get off the ground, and then it took some time for us to get through the evaluation and actually see where we are now, and we're in a completely different place than where we started. So it was really great working with the team, and I think the last thing I would say is, as program managers, some of the program managers I'm guessing are watching today, it's daunting when you set out with the evaluation function to figure out what it is you're going to look at. But I think you really need to have a willingness to learn and work with those colleagues and not just say, okay, you asked me these questions, here's my box of information and data, here you go. It doesn't work that way, but it's very easy to take that approach, so you have to keep those lines of communication open.
Thanks, Gemma. So pick up the phone and,
Yes.
and be in constant communication
Yes.
is what we're hearing.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you so much. Kimberly Accardi, you lead the evaluation function at ISED. Given what Gemma has shared, what areas would you like to amplify or like us to consider in addition to that?
Yeah, I think there's a few, and David and Danielle brought up that, the notion of value for money, and you've talked about, the current, context financially, and evaluation has this wonderful opportunity of making sure that with the finite resources we have, are we investing our time and our energy and our money in the right things for serving Canadians? And so I think to be able to do that, it goes to mindsets, and Gemma spoke to that a little bit in terms of it can be a little daunting to have evaluation come in, and some people are wide open arms and other people aren't so much. And I kind of like to remind people, you would pay huge sums of money for a consulting firm to come in and do the type of work that an evaluation team will come and do. Like, we're going to dig into your data, we're going to look at case studies, we're going to look at, comparisons to other jurisdictions, survey participants. There's a lot of rich information that when you're so busy running a program, once it's going, it's very hard to have the time to do those things. And so I'd really say it's not just about learning and being open in communication, but really lean in to the process. Like invite us, share. Une partie pour moi, ça revient de partager qu'est-ce qui est important pour vous, comme quelles sont vos préoccupations. Y a-t-il des éléments avec lesquels dans votre programme vous avez des questionnements? C'est pas juste les éléments traditionnels qu'on peut évaluer. Si vous me dites qu'il y a quelque chose qui me chicote, j'ai une préoccupation, j'ai une incertitude, si on fait la bonne chose, ça peut nous pointer dans une direction additionnelle pour vraiment rapporter la valeur ajoutée dans l'évaluation qui va vraiment bien informer les prochaines étapes pour le programme comme tel, pour l'investissement qui va avoir lieu. Ça fait que pour moi, c'est très, très, très pertinent en tant que, pas juste une communication active, mais ouverte et franche des deux bords pour qu'on puisse parler de qu'est-ce qui va puis qu'est-ce qui va pas. The other thing for me that I really always talk about, and you spoke to a little bit, is for some of the data, it's really about starting from the beginning, and you talked about working with your chief data officer and what do those performance measurement elements look like in the data strategy. But when you're some of the big organizations, like speaking for ISED, where we have all these contribution agreements, it's also about what's the clarity. So, if you're running a program, what is the clarity with recipients in terms of what are the data expectations? Do we have the same definitions? Checking in to make sure that it's coming in consistently, because you can't recreate data 5 years later. And so it's really about getting that good foundation to get the most out of your evaluation. And if you're 3 years in and haven't done it yet, now's a good time to check and see. But I also really like to reinforce that a strong end in the evaluation starts with a great beginning where we've had those thoughtful processes, and you're not just communicating with evaluation, but you're communicating with your, results, your data teams, and also the recipients to make sure that you all have the same definitions of what things are, so when data comes in, you can use it.
Wow, that's such a great addition to what Gemma has brought us to. We're hearing some tones here about how that openness to learning and to being able to adapt and evolve even as you're going through the evaluation is so important to being able to make it to the objectives of what you want to learn. And the fact that evaluations are like free research, so take advantage of it. Thank you, Kimberly. Benoît Cadieux. Vous avez vécu des expériences vraiment intéressantes à EDSC en travaillant sur le programme d'assurance emploi alors qu'il faisait l'objet de différentes révisions. Alors, pouvez-vous nous parler un peu de cette période?
Merci beaucoup, Derek. Donc oui, en effet, je suis Benoît Cadieux. Je travaille dans la politique de l'assurance emploi. Puis, durant le 5 ans avec le programme de l'assurance emploi, les derniers 5 ans, j'ai eu le plaisir de travailler avec Jérôme ici pour compléter 3 évaluations en particulier. Puis, j'aimerais dire que chacune de ces évaluations-là, pour nous, l'objectif était très différent. Donc, la première évaluation qu'on a complétée, c'est une évaluation pour les prestations de maladie. Puis les prestations de maladie, pour vous donner un peu de contexte, c'est des prestations qui existent depuis les années 70. Elles n'ont pas vraiment changé. Donc, la grosse question est toujours, pourquoi est-ce que vous faites une évaluation? Ça existe, ça fait 40 ans, ça n'a pas changé. Donc, qu'est-ce que vous voulez aller chercher de cette d'une autre évaluation. Il y en a déjà plusieurs qui ont été faites dans le passé. Donc, c'est vraiment la question à se demander en tant que programme, what is it that you want to get from the evaluation? What's the objective? It's working with your evaluation team to really make it clear on what is the evaluation going to bring to you. What was the original objective of the program, and how can the evaluation help you determine whether the program continues to meet that objective or not. And in the case of the EI sickness benefits, what's interesting there is that there was a lot of stakeholders, a lot of government were pushing to extend it to beyond 15 weeks. 15 weeks was not enough. Extend it to 50, extend it to 26, extend it to 35, whatever the number was. And so for us, the evaluation was not so much to determine whether the program as it was worked. We knew it worked. We knew it met its objective. It was to really, can we build into some of this analysis that looks into, is there a need to extend further? Is there a need to extend to 52 weeks or 26 weeks? What can we get, not so much evaluating the program itself, but evaluating what it could be and determining whether there's a need for it or not. And I would say the timing of that was incredible because shortly around that time, the government had made the commitment to extend to 26 weeks. And there was a lot of pressure to extend further, like I said. And so the results of the evaluation were extremely useful in building the story, building the case why 26 weeks was the right number. Donc, on a vraiment eu la chance d'utiliser les résultats pour informer nos soumissions au Conseil du Trésor qui sont venues par la suite, nos propositions budgétaires et tout ça. Donc, tout ça pour dire que je pense que quand vous vous assisez avec votre programme d'évaluation, le timing de l'évaluation est super important et super critique parce que ça va déterminer comment utile l'information va être pour vous, pour informer ce qui vient par la suite. I just want to... Do I have a bit of time?
Oh, you're good, Benoit.
Okay. Pour les deux prochaines évaluations qu'on a fait, on a évalué les prestations maternité parentale. And that was really different because maternity and parental benefits went through a lot of changes, very recent changes. And so the objective there was to look at what was the impact of those changes, and was, are those changes, did they make a difference? Are they being used to their full extent? So the focus was very different. It was really about looking in what recently was changed and seeing if that works, if that made a difference. So I just want to say that again, c'est un exemple où on s'était assis ensemble puis on a établi des objectifs très clairs de ce que nous on voulait en ressortir de cette évaluation-là. Puis je pense qu'à la fin, c'est à cause qu'on avait this mutual understanding of what the objective should be, that we got a lot out of it. For us, it was a very useful evaluation. And the third evaluation we did was on a pilot project that was also done very recently on providing extra weeks of benefits to seasonal workers. And again, that was extremely useful because it informed the future extensions of that pilot project and the development of options for what can we do next, where can we go from there. So I'll leave it at that, yeah, that's my experience.
Great, merci, Benoit. It's a great example of how evaluations can be brought to bear in a department that has, quite a rich source of data to look at different questions of policy, in fact. So it's a fantastic example. Jérôme Mercier, c'est toujours agréable d'avoir le dernier mot dans un panel. Vous avez passé plusieurs années à diriger des évaluations à EDSC. Comment feriez-vous le lien entre ce que nous avons entendu aujourd'hui et vos propres conseils pour tirer le meilleur parti de l'expérience d'évaluation?
Merci, Derek. Toujours un plaisir d'avoir le dernier mot, mais c'est aussi un défi. Hein? C'est-à-dire, où est notre plus-value? Mais non, c'est un plaisir. Merci pour l'invitation. Puis pour cette belle discussion aussi, c'est très intéressant. Couple themes, I think, that stood out for me today. I heard about early involvement. I heard about willingness to learn from each other, open communication, open channel of communications. I think, Benoit, you were alluding to scope. You don't need to scope your evaluations the same way depending on the program. And then there's this whole, sometimes I call it the elephant in the room, is the data. So we talked about that a little bit. I feel all these points, all these themes, it points to evaluation as being a kind of a collective endeavor when you think about it. And one of my favorite saying is that evaluation is a team sport. But for a team sport to work, we need to have a good understanding of what is our respective roles as part of the team. I think it's Kimberly or Gemma was talking about, let's learn about each other. So evaluators come in, they have specific expertise in how to conduct, we were mentioning quantitative, qualitative lines of evidence, and how do you pull all these findings together and find takeaways from this. On the other hand, program analysts, they know their programs inside out, they know their trade-offs, and sometimes these trade-offs may not be as apparent for evaluators as well, where they need to work together. So how can you formalize this partnership or this teamwork? This brings me to scoping. So at ESDC, one of our practice, in fact, is we formally establish like an evaluation plan where you lay out the evaluation questions you'll be looking into and how you're going to be looking into it. And we present those at our performance measurement and evaluation committee for decision. Well, some view this as a good practice, and I think some of the reason is that it helps get buy-in at the ADM level, that we're going to take time and resources and conduct certain evaluation activities. It may prevent less productive discussion around scope later on as part of your evaluation process. It can also help manage expectations in terms of the art of the possible, given the data available with upper management. Here's what we can do given where we are. So maybe a couple of things to keep in mind. It goes back a bit to what Benoit was saying. Like, it's not because we evaluate programs that we evaluate them the same way. So scoping. Let's be mindful of overly ambitious plans. No need to look at all the aspects of the program. So programs are at different juncture in their,
Life cycle, for
life
example.
cycle. And evaluation is an iterative process. I think I heard once in a movie, we will be back. So we don't need, there's specific times or specific moments in a program, so let's scope accordingly. Not all questions needs to be addressed by evaluation. Some of it could be done by good old policy analysis, or it can be done by a research project. So if evaluation have comparative advantage compared to these functions, how can we take advantage of that? Narrower scopes are conducive to more concise and clearer reports. Data. So as the expression goes, evaluation is predicated on good data. And this inevitably points to the program data collection strategy. And that's not, I think that's what we were alluding at the beginning of this discussion. This is not a walk in the park, and we know that. And often you get into questions of data collection strategy at a time where the onus is in fact on getting the money out the door, and the next evaluation is kind of it's like in the so far distant future that I will deal with that later. I think the key here is not to get the perfect in the way of the good. So let's get your foundational, I think I heard the word foundational piece in place on which you can build on. And keep in mind that, again, we were talking about partnership, evaluation can support program individuals to get this done. Okay, last thing that I would like to note, and So as as public servants, one of our value is to give honest and impartial advice to decision makers. And the internal evaluation function as currently set up in the policy on results, it gives us an opportunity to do just that. So with that in mind, I would say maybe the following. Let's the facts speak for themselves as part of our evaluation documents. Be mindful of the temptation to focus on only what works, or to overly contextualize less flattering findings about our programs. That said, this notion of speaking truth to power, it comes with some responsibilities, and I think that's where a constructive, collaborative partnership between programs and evaluation comes to fore.
Wow, thank you, Jérôme. That was a great aperçu of the messages we've heard here, and I think it's very fitting that the person with the last word would quote the Terminator in an evaluation event like this. So, thank you for that. I do want to reflect on one of the points that you made, which was about the importance of data in an evaluation. I'd like to tie it back to something that Danielle also expressed to us, and that was in how evaluations are conducted with partners in the Indigenous communities. I had the most fascinating interview with one of Danielle's staff in the lead up to this, where she expressed to me how some of the greatest learning that they engaged in their evaluations with Indigenous communities was in not collecting quantitative but qualitative data through narratives, and understanding that how narratives change over time was just as informative, and in some ways provided a deeper understanding of how programs were impacting communities than even quantitative data. So I think it's a lesson for us as members of the evaluation community or members who are enacting programs to keep in mind that quantitative, qualitative, it's about context, it's about understanding, and I think it's very important to just keep that in mind. So thank you very much, Jérôme. En tout cas, what a terrific panel exchange we've had here. A lot of different lessons and ideas and practical tips. But now it's the time you've been waiting for out on the webcast. We've got the question period here. So we have about 10 minutes to send in a question if you haven't already. And I think there's been a prompt online. Go to WooClap, enter the code A30, and find the bubble chat icon down on the bottom right side of your screen. Please do remember to ask questions in the language of your choice. Now, we've had a couple of questions come in already during the session, so I'm going to look at the screen here. And the first one, I think, is relevant to basically anybody doing an evaluation. Do you have any tips on how to best communicate with evaluators when you review a draft report and do not agree with one of the findings? So that's I think a very universal question. I'm just wondering if any members of the panel here would like to take a quick stab at that. David, over to you.
Yeah, I'll take a run because I've been on both sides of that fence. I think the first thing is to be factual. Like, I think if you have an issue with one of the findings, it's both sides need to look at what are the facts that we're talking about here and agree on the facts. And that's when I think you get into the interpretation and the context of those facts. I think from a program management side, you have to go in with some self-reflection, knowing that you may not like what is said, but if the finding is actually valid, maybe it's more about how it's presented and have that conversation. I think as an evaluator, you also have to you need to have your independent judgment, but not sort of stand on that to the point where you don't feel you can ever back down or you can show any sort of flexibility when discussing findings. So that's how I've seen that work best when that's occurred.
Great. Kimberly?
I think maybe just to build on that, we talked a lot about open communication and early on in, and I think that those are really good points, and that, I think all the tactics that you've indicated, that's really the approach to take. but it's much easier to do if you've already been talking to your evaluator, you've been treating it like it's a collaborative, activity, and the relationships are there. It's like any other conversation you're having with a stakeholder where you might have a divergent view. If the relationship is there, it's much easier to broach. And if you are in the context or in the process of doing an eval, like having those early conversations, you talked about the early scoping, transparency on what we're talking about, also asking to see the prelim findings before the report's drafted, because once, a lot of time and energy and effort has been invested once the report is drafted. So having a quick touch-in about the preliminary findings can be really helpful to understand, like, did we not understand something? Was there information that's missing that now you realize could amplify or support or provide a counterfactual? So I think those would be some extra things that, based on the conversation, I'd add in on that.
That's a great point. Dale Carnegie always said in his signature book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, it's much harder to get people off of no after they've said it than to influence whether they even say no at the beginning. So I think those are great strategies for how we approach this question. The next question we have, what measures can be put in place to protect sensitive information collected during the evaluation and to reassure participants? Would anybody like to take a stab at this question? And it may be more relevant to some of your programs versus others.
But they are, maybe I will try to start to the best of my abilities. But when we conduct, for instance, qualitative lines of evidence, there is, and we're working with experts on privacy and from a legal standpoint of how this information is used, how do we protect anonymity, and how this information will be aggregated so that what was communicated could not be associated back to the individual in question. So there are a number of good practice in this regard, and I would encourage individuals to work with their privacy and confidentiality areas of expertise in their department.
C'est des bons conseils, Jérôme. Danielle?
I think it gets a little bit tricky. So yes, absolutely. I think on the pure data side, there are protections in place. I think it can be uncomfortable when you're starting to, work with programs, and folks working in programs may see shortcomings, they may see problems, and there's probably a hesitancy to come forward. So again, I think it starts from building that collaborative relationship, that trust approach. We don't see anything in our evaluations that are attributable, and so creating that space for people to speak freely. It's all about speaking truth to power, and telling it as they see it. And sometimes an evaluation can be a safer way to bring forward an issue than kind of going up the line to director and the DG, and it creates that space. And I think program managers have to go into it with that mindset that you may hear some things that you don't want to hear, but this is all part of the process. And so creating that kind of trust between the program staff and the evaluation team is really key.
It's a great reflection. Thanks, Danielle. It almost brings to mind that it's sometimes easier for somebody else to bring up the things that you are maybe facing yourself, and then contextualize them for them. So it's good advice. Thank you very much. Another question that we've received too is, how can we ensure that the evaluation includes a useful analysis of GBA Plus and intersectionality for my program? We heard a bit about this during our opening remarks, but what are your thoughts collectively on this question? If anyone would like to venture a start.
Do you want to start, or I'm happy to start? I think I'm going to pause and reflect on the question, because I actually think one would hope that there was already that assessment done by the program managers, and before you get to the evaluation point. But I think, at least in our case with the evaluation of our program, it was really about taking a second pair of eyes and stepping back. Are we actually achieving what we set out to do, especially with a GBA Plus lens? And is it still relevant in today's context? Because when we started our program and got evaluated, we were a few years in, but we were really, like, it was really setting us up to hopefully renew the program, and we were successful in achieving that. But we also needed to think about, well, what are the GBA plus lenses we needed to apply going forward, right? It's not only about looking back, and so I think that it's not easy to unpack. You have to do it at the beginning, but speaking from a GBA plus lens, you also should be doing it fairly regularly. I wouldn't say every year, but you should be taking a look at your analysis every couple of years to make sure it's still on track and it's relevant, I think.
Thanks, Gemma. Kimberly?
Oh, that was, yeah.
If I could add to that, I think, you know, from a program area, we talked a lot about how to make the evaluation useful for you. And I think part of that is, and you know, for us in EI, we have tons of data. We have a lot of administrative data and everything, but we still don't have that good GBA plus data. And this is an area, I think, that whenever we have an evaluation coming, we see this as an opportunity. Let's build in some GBA plus analysis as much as we can to try to get some useful information out of it. So I think for that, I mean, I don't have really the answer to the question, but I think it's, if you plan early and you work with your evaluation team to say, you know, I'd like to, for the evaluation to put a lot of emphasis on in this area, I think you're bound to be successful in at least getting some useful GBA plus analysis out of it.
The only other thing I would add is just the importance too of incorporating GBA plus practices in our own work as evaluators. So yes, what the program sets out at the front end in your MC and in your Treasury Board submission, you have to have the right frame, but we also have to walk the talk when we're out in the field. And something we really found during the pandemic, not being able to get out into community and meet face-to-face was a huge challenge in our evaluation work. You know, so face-to-face meetings, prioritizing that, creating those opportunities, providing, you know, childcare if you're doing focus groups, or you know, meeting during certain hours, and applying all of those, you know, good practices, which is perhaps more incumbent on the evaluators than on the program, but making sure that we create every opportunity to hear from that diverse range of folks receiving the services is really important as well.
Great, that's an excellent reflection. Sometimes our own work is impacted directly by GBA plus and intersectionality considerations, and it could bias the outcomes of the very evaluations we're doing and the lessons we're trying to draw. So these are really powerful reflections you're offering today.
Translating into other languages, Indigenous languages, immigrant languages, so that
that's right.
You get the access.
Thank you. Jerome.
I was alluding to the fact that we like to do evaluation plans early on and present them to our performance measurement evaluation committee. So we do include specific language around GBA plus, but that's also an opportunity to manage expectations, again, given information available. That's an opportunity to do that. And I think, to go back to your point, it's not just quantitative GBA plus. You can also look at it using your qualitative lines of evidence.
Thanks for that, Jerome.
Now I feel like I should. Everyone else has had it. No, but I really appreciate the practical, tangible things and solutions that have been offered on a GBA plus point, because you know, from an ISED perspective, and a little bit like what you're speaking to, is, you know, we look at we have GBA in our plan every time we conduct an eval. But, you know, in all candor, we still feel like it's a place where we're struggling in terms of having sufficient data to have, you know, the types of findings, the types of intelligence we're wanting to have come out, the ability to disaggregate it, to be able to tell more nuanced stories. So I think we have a lot of work to do in that space. So really happy to hear some of those like tangible things that we can be doing, because I think, to me, one of the values, and I joke about it, is, you know, the beauty of evaluation is to share those insights back out to the system. So we can say a common trend or challenge or persistent issue with us is having sufficient GBA, the type of GBA information we're looking for. And we want to be able to have it, because otherwise we're going to reinvent the same square wheel. And so proactively sharing out the different trends that we're seeing in all of our evals to lend information forward is helpful, and this is an important one.
Great, thanks, Kimberly. And without meaning to, I think you've provided me an excellent segue into our next question too. Just the idea that having your big questions already laid out at the beginning of your evaluation or even the beginning of your program helps to determine what it is that you want to measure, achieve, guide in terms of data collection and such. So to that end, the question we've received here is, what are best practices for the kickoff meeting when evaluators in the programs meet for the first time, for example? And we'll take one response on this, and then we'll wrap up. Gemma.
I have a small one. It sounds inconsequential, but it really matters. Have everyone who's going to be involved in the evaluation in the room. Because I think one of the things we learned in our engagements is the program managers or the analysts aren't always at the table at the very beginning and get roped in later. And so if you can engage them and they have a clear expectation of what this is going to be like, and also don't underestimate the effort that it will require to work with your evaluation team to get a good product at the end. I think someone mentioned earlier, you're stuck in operations, and that's actually the team that I lead. So we are in operations, so we're stuck in like the day-to-day, but you have to get out of that to prepare and then to support your evaluation team in conducting.
Great. Thanks a lot, Gemma. Look, this has been a great exchange today. It's really, truly informative, both questions and advice that we've seen. Danielle, I'd like to give you a moment just to wrap up with some of your concluding thoughts and reflections on today.
Okay. Tout d'abord, merci à vous tous. Merci à l'école pour avoir organisé la session aujourd'hui. J'ai bien aimé d'entendre des perspectives de tout le monde. I think if I had a closing thought for folks in the program community who we were really trying to target with this section, with this session is, challenging you to think about evaluation and to come into the process with that growth mindset. That this is about managing change. This is about understanding the world around us and how do we better serve Canadians. Change is a constant. We live it every day. We can't be static, and we do need to evolve and adjust and innovate as we go. And so this is an opportunity. And I really loved this idea of evaluation is a team sport. And I think to Kimberly's point, think of it as an opportunity. This is something that's being done for you, not done to you. We're not the Auditor General when we come knocking, but it's really an opportunity to dig deep and to push aside kind of the day-to-day and really reflect on where we're going, what it is that we're trying to achieve, and how do we get there together? And I think that's where I really see it as well at the senior management level through our performance measurement and evaluation community. I see heads nodding, and that other ADMs start to see the lessons learned, and that we're pulling from an evaluation in one particular area and being able to apply it elsewhere. So it really is, I think, a tremendous learning opportunity.
Great, thanks so much. David.
Well, it's always hard to follow Danielle, but I would say, evaluation for me is a public service. It's part of who we are, and participating in evaluation is part of being a healthy, strong public service. How can we improve what we do? How can we deliver the best results for the people that we serve? And for me, those are the fundamentals, whether you're an evaluator or a program manager. So, j'aimerais remercier encore une fois tout le monde. I would just like to say as well that the Policy and Directive on Results that govern evaluation and performance measurement can be found on the web, and also the TBS results portal on GCpedia does have a lot of really interesting guidance and resource material. Mais merci beaucoup pour la conversation aujourd'hui. C'était un plaisir d'être avec un panel comme vous.
Merci, David. And we'll be sharing those resources with you Well, they're up on screen right now for those of you on the webcast, and we'll be sending that out in a message to you shortly after. Alors, avant de partir, nous aimerions avoir votre avis sur les sujets d'évaluation de programmes dont vous aimeriez en savoir plus. Ajoutez vos suggestions en quelques mots dans le nuage de mots de l'équipe que l'équipe est en train de mettre sur l'écran maintenant. And finally, let's recognize the contribution of our speakers today. Advice is just theory until you've lived it, and you have distilled the best for us. So thank you very much for being with us today. That concludes our event today, and thank you all for attending.